Have you been told you need to stop doing what you love, whether it's exercise, running, or a sport? Well, here at Dynamic, we don't like that answer. In this podcast, we'll talk to leaders in the health and wellness space from Southwest Florida to get the solutions you need to get you back to doing what you love. Welcome to the Dynamic Naples Podcast. What's going on? Dr. Chris here. Today I want to talk about the link between exercise and inflammation. You may have heard the expression, movement is medicine, and I want to talk about how movement truly is a medicine. I'll get into that in a bit. But to understand that, I think we have to understand what inflammation exactly is, because we kind of throw that word around and it doesn't seem to have much meaning, and generally it's just considered a bad thing. Well, if you don't have to look very far to recall that it is the first step in the healing process. So why are we blocking it? Turns out that's a pretty complicated question. So let me kind of give you a quick overview. This might get a little technical. So the first step is initiation. So this is part of the inflammatory cascade. The inflammatory response is triggered by recognition of a stimuli, such as a pathogen or damaged cells, and the immune system sees that, and it leads to activation of immune cells, such as macrophages or mast cells, at the site of the injury or the infection. Then what happens next is you have vasodilation. So the arteries, the veins expand and they become more permeable, and that allows activated immune cells to come into the area and more blood to flow to the site of the injury. This then increases blood flow, which that's what causes all the redness and heat, and the permeability of the walls increase further, allowing fluids, proteins, immune cells to leak into the surrounding tissue, which leads to the swelling. Next, you get a recruitment phase where immune cells such as monocytes and neutrophils, they come to the area to help beat or chew up those pathogens and remove the debris from injured tissue. Then there's some chemical signaling that occurs, and those are called chemokines. And then you have phagocytosis and cytokine release. So again, sorry, this is super technical, but basically they engulf all the debris, and they're like the cleanup crew. And then finally, you have the resolution phase. So once the threat has been neutralized and tissue repair has begun, there's anti-inflammatory signals that dampen the response. So it's all super tightly regulated. If this process gets dysregulated, this can turn into chronic inflammation and turn into things like autoimmune disease. But in our monkey brain, we just think inflammation bad, stick ice on it. Like we're going to circumvent that whole technical process that's involved over millennia. Now, I'm not going to sit here and bash icing injuries. You want to ice it, okay. I just don't think it's the best answer for inflammation. So let's get into the semantics of this word inflammation. So first of all, I kind of see different types of inflammation. You've got acute inflammation and local inflammation. So think of you just rolled your ankle and the ligament flares up. That's acute and local. You've got chronic inflammation, or you've got systemic inflammation when you're beating off a virus. There are certainly scenarios where an acute injury can turn into chronic inflammation. You may, sort of argue that maybe that's a maladaptation. So one way to think of it is an acute and local inflammatory response is probably a good thing. That's going to help your tissues heal. You could argue that a chronic and systemic response could potentially be the right response, but maybe you're fighting off a virus for months, or maybe you're working in a coal mine and constantly exposed to environmental toxins. So I think we have to be a little more precise with this word inflammation and how we throw it around, because it kind of depends on your goals and what you're trying to achieve and what the appropriate response is for it. And a lot of times it's let it take its course. The other thing that I like to bring up too is that I make a distinction between, and I got this from Gary Reinl, by the way, this distinction between inflammation and swelling. So inflammation is the first phase of the repair, and then swelling that's that cleanup crew that I was referring to. That's the debris, right? That's the stuff that you want to get out of the area, and there are better ways than just icing to do that, and pain-free movement is probably the best way, because how is that swelling handled? That's through the lymphatic system. So there is a crossover between your blood vessels, your lymph vessels. So once that debris is being cleaned up in the injured area, it's supposed to go into the lymphatic system where it gets sort of cycled up towards your thoracic cavity, and then your body deals with it, and you basically urinate out the waste product. The issue is that the lymphatic system doesn't have a heart that circulates the fluids. It works by the pump action of muscles. So literally just going for a walk all the time, every pumping of your calf, quad, glutes, breathing, all those things help push those fluids up to the thoracic cavity where it needs to get to and helps it drain. And just another reason why just resting an injury is probably not going to do the trick. So that's just one way that movement is medicine. It just helps mitigate the swelling through the lymphatic system. But there's another system that probably is just as potent, and this has to do with cortisone or cortisol. So cortisone is a steroid. You're familiar with the creams, the injections. It is synthetic cortisol. It is like a nuclear bomb of inflammation. And sometimes it does wonders for people. Turns out we can produce this just through exercise. So when you exercise, you stimulate the fight or flight response, the sympathetic nervous system, to a degree, and that triggers cortisol to be released. There's a reason for that, because cortisol liberates sugar into the blood so we can use it as an energy source. So it's just a natural adaptation. And when you're in a fight or flight stage, the body doesn't know the difference between working out and being chased by a bear. So it starts to prioritize things. It shuts down systems it doesn't need, and it upregulates systems that it does need. So that's why cortisol suppresses inflammation, suppresses the immune system. This is where I wish we were more precise with our vernacular, because to say it's anti-inflammatory is a bit of a misnomer, because we do want that inflammatory response. Anti-swelling would probably be a better fit here. So this is where it gets a little tricky and honestly quite interesting. The thing is, unfortunately, our bodies can become cortisol resistant, just like we can become insulin resistant from a high processed carb diet. If you're constantly spiking cortisol through chronic stressors of life or chronically being underslept, your body will stop being responsive to cortisol. We tend to categorize things as good or bad. It's just unfortunate the body does not work that way. The body's about balance. So it's not like the sympathetic system is good or bad or the parasympathetic system is good or bad. It's all about keeping a balance. So we want to be in parasympathetic mode most of the time, so that when we need the sympathetic mode, it can do its job and adapt correctly. This part is speculation here, but I suspect that chronically spiking the sympathetic system leads to cortisol resistance, and I think this may be one of the keys in turning acute and local inflammation to chronic and systemic. I think we need more research on that, but I think that's a really interesting question. So at the end of the day, what do? I would say if you're injured, don't fear inflammation. You want that process to happen, but you do want to mitigate the swelling. How do we do that? Through movement, through pain-free movement, and you may have to find ways to do this. Ideally, you can walk it off in a sense. That's probably the best way to get the lymphatic system pumping. If walking is too painful, say you injured your right foot, can you get on a bike and use your left leg, and maybe like an assault bike, and use your arms as well and just keep the right leg off of it if it hurts too much to move? Sure. The lymphatic system is all one system. So that is, although you're not moving the limb that's affected, you're moving the rest of your body, that will mitigate some of that swelling. Then once the pain levels have reduced to a tolerable level, that's when you want to start to exercise and start hitting cortisol to a point that's protective and helping with the swelling that's in the area. That, to me, is the best way to go about it. So, hopefully that wasn't too heady, and that's all I have for you this week. I did talk about Gary Reinl briefly. I did a podcast with him in the season 1. He talks about the RICE protocol and why he thinks it's not the right way to go about things. Go back and listen to that one if you haven't, and I will be talking to you guys soon. Why guess when you can test? Do you get hangry or crash after a carb-heavy meal? These could be indicators that there is a dysfunction in your blood glucose regulation. If left unchecked, it can lead to irreversible changes. If you catch it quick enough, you can make diet and lifestyle changes that will get your levels where they need to be. 88% of Americans are pre-diabetic and don't know it. Diabetes underpins many of the pathologies we deal with in this country, such as obesity, high blood pressure, heart disease, and stroke. For some reason, it is rarely screened with your physician, and if they do test for blood glucose, it's usually with an A1C or a fasting glucose, which can sometimes give you a false negative. NutriSense is a company that supplies continuous glucose monitors. We paired with NutriSense to get you real-time data to see how your physiology responds to glucose. The NutriSense app lets you track your daily activity to see how food, sleep, exercise, and stress impact your glucose. You can log or import this data into the NutriSense app to see the effect on your blood glucose levels as soon as it happens. Use the code DrChris25 for $25 off your order today. Do you have unexplained pain, or do you wonder just how healthy you are? When was the last time you had your blood tested? Blood chemistry analysis is a great tool to stay ahead of any health conditions, and now you can have control of your health with Let's Get Checked. Let's Get Checked is an incredible company that sends blood tests to your home. You can choose from over 30 different tests, whether that's thyroid function, testosterone, micronutrient, cholesterol, or C-reactive protein, which is a marker for inflammation. It is sent to you with free shipping, and you get your results in 2 to 5 days. No physician referral needed. Use the code DPT25 for 25% off. You can find links in the show notes. Did you know that you can get started with physical therapy without a physician's referral? Physical therapists don't just solve pain, we get down to the root cause and keep it from coming back. We also discuss all things health, such as nutrition and lifestyle changes. If you feel that you could use some help, let's get on a free consult call. Go to www.dynamicnaples.com and sign up for a free call. Also, if you like this podcast, please give us a rating wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us spread the message. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.